On Tuesday, May 19th, we're joined by Councilor Walsh, Councilor Fenton, Councilor Allen, Councilor Williams, Councilor Curran, Councilor Whitfield, Councilor Ramos, Councilor Gomez, and I believe I saw Councilor Letterman, who just popped to another area of the screen. So welcome. We're also joined by Mr. Schimmel of the Water and Sewer Commission, as well as Commissioner Vanessa Otero. And so, Mr. Schimmel, I'll let you introduce your team in a moment. I just want to acknowledge my colleagues, Councilor Curran, as well as Councilor Gomez, who first brought this issue to first brought their concerns to the forefront, which ultimately ended up in us having this meeting here today. So what is going to happen is I'm going to allow Mr. Schimmel and whoever else on his team he would like to have present to the council for 5 to 10 minutes around the proposed rate increase. And then I will open the floor up to Councilor Curran, as well as Councilor Gomez. I'm sorry, Councilor Walsh, I missed you. I'll acknowledge Councilor Walsh as well. My apologies, Councilor. Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. And so I will open the floor up first to Councilor Curran and then to Councilor Gomez, followed by Councilor Fenton, who has a spreadsheet that we will attempt to share with the entire council, and he'll walk us through that. So Mr. Schimmel, if you want to introduce your team and give us a brief overview in anticipation of questions, addressing questions and concerns, it'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Councilor. I'm going to have a short presentation here that I think will be really helpful. I have our Comptroller, Anthony Basile, and Chairwoman Otero is going to open up with a couple comments, and then I'll jump right into a brief presentation that I'll attempt to share.
Thank you.
So if I may start, thank you, President Hurst and all the members of the council for the invitation to discuss not only the proposed rate hike, but the circumstances which led us to this point. First, I'd like to say that the Commission remains committed to its mission of providing reliable and affordable services to all of its customers. My hope is to better inform you and residents of our yearly process for developing and announcing our budget and the related rate increases. A couple of things to keep in mind regarding said process. First, each year, the complex legal, environmental, and regulatory challenges we face require the Commission to carefully plan its budget and its infrastructure improvement projects. In other words, the process is the same and just as arduous every year. The compounding issue this year, of course, is COVID-19. Second, the Commission has a statutory requirement to issue the budget, and we do so with the understanding that we will continue to push to get more information and work towards reducing the overall rate increase. Again, in other words, there's still more data to be collected to determine this year's rate increase. Third, I'd like to point out that critical infrastructure needs are ongoing, and therefore we must maintain our credit rating if we hope to continue to borrow at a low rate. Years prior saw a majority of investments or capital projects in response to regulatory needs. On the sewer side, you'll see that what we're trying to push forward is work to be done on the water side. And I'd also like to point out that during my tenure at the Commission, we have moved from a reactionary stance to a better developed long-term balanced investments planning process. In mid-March, as the potential impacts of COVID-19 on the community became clear, the Commission adopted temporary changes to its collection policies that suspended shutoffs for non-payment, suspended late fees, and eliminated restrictions in payment plans and allowed for longer terms. The Commission has extended these terms through August 2020. In addition, we have also allocated funds in the FY21 budget for a customer assistance program. The program has been further enhanced since its inception, and Josh will be able to give you more information on that. I say all of this to clearly point out to you that the process for developing our budget and the related rate increases that are a result of budget process are directly related to our infrastructure needs. And so I want to be clear with all of you that Springfield is not exempt from the infrastructure needs that you see all over the country. And what we're trying to do every year is find a balance where we can address those needs, and also make sure that the rate increases are appropriate and affordable. This year was different. The dip that we saw in consumption due to COVID-19 was a cause of concern, and that's where you see the 16.9%. I want to say that 16.9% again is not something that comes out of thin air, but of a process to ensure that we are investing in our infrastructure in a way that avoids a public health crisis, and the kind of public health crisis that you have seen in other parts of this country. And that's the balance we have to play. We have to find every single year. And so I hope that this sort of sets the stage for what Josh is going to provide you with more detail.
Thank you, Ms. Otero. Mr. Schimmel, did you want to speak next, or
sure.
Over to Mr. Basile?
No, I'll take it from here. Thank you for the opportunity, counselors, and going to jump into a little bit of detail of our process, because I think it's going to be important and helpful for you all to understand where the rates come from and the process. So I'm going to step through it kind of quick because we have a 10-minute limit or so here, but I'm going to walk you through it. But I think just to start off, I'm going to say that certainly the COVID pandemic has shined the light on a lot of vulnerabilities in everything we do, and the water sector is no different. And we're going to speak to that, but really we are solely funded by what we bill. We have no other source of funding. There's no state aid, there's no federal aid. So when you look at what our rate structure is, our rate structure supports us being able to provide water to the entire lower Pioneer Valley, which is 30% of the entire population of Western Massachusetts. So that's funded by what we bill, wholesale, retail. So I just wanted to point that out, and certainly we can jump into that. So can I share, counselors? I'm gonna attempt, you let me know what you can see here.
Brendan. I don't know if Brendan, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
I neglected to tell you that Mr. Schimmel would like to share his screen as well. Can you allow him to do so?
Yes, I have it turned on so that anyone can screen share, one person at a time.
Thank you.
Okay, are we sharing now? Let me try this one. How about that? Can you folks see that okay?
We cannot.
No.
How about that? No?
Here we go. Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
You're good to go.
Okay, so let's jump into really the importance of all of this stuff. It's all about the financing. That's how we can afford to keep investing in our infrastructure and being able to reliably supply water. So we'll walk you through. We'll attempt to walk you through. Are screens advancing for you all?
Yes.
Okay. The financial planning is really important to us because that is the only way that we can sustainably deliver on our mission of providing clean water, period. And so these are the elements that go into our planning process. So the financial policies and practices that we have established allow us to establish budget discipline each year. They provide controlled flexibility for the unexpected. A lot of times projects choose us. We do not choose them. This is an ongoing issue with aging infrastructure. And then it allows us to gain stronger financial ratings with the rating agencies, which allows us to get better borrowing terms so we can do more work more effectively at a cheaper cost. And so as with many things, it's just about the money and the financing. So we've really had a goal here for decades, and even more so in the past few years as budgets get tighter and there's increasing demand on certain aspects of our work, to have stabilized and predictable rate increases. Obviously, that's out of whack this year with the impacts of COVID, but we've really made it our mission to make sure that our ratepayers are seeing what they get in the rate increase in investment. And you can see that around the city every construction season where we're doing work. And then also just to state that there's an unprecedented need for investment, and we're not alone in that, but we have the aging infrastructure, we have evolving regulations that require investment and regulatory compliance, and then we have newer challenges that have a price tag to them, which is climate change and cybersecurity. And so each of those components are what we're trying to balance in our investment and O&M strategies. In the budget process, moving from our financial standpoint into the budgeting process, each year, starting in January, we develop our budget based on our O&M needs, our capital investment plan, which is strategic. It's a planned strategy that spans over 20 years and looks at the condition of all of our infrastructure. We have close to $1 billion worth of infrastructure, much of it more than 75 years old. And then we also take a look at what our current debt service is and what the planned debt service is. And then we forecast our revenues, and that is how we develop ultimately the rate each year. It's based upon demand for water usage and how that gets calculated out to what the rates and the revenues will be. Again, no other income other than what we get from our bills. And then we need to adjust that to meet our financial policies and goals so that we can continue to borrow at reasonable rates and be in a good financial position to be effective in our ability to repair and replace. So that's maintaining our debt service coverage for the finance people out there. And it's making sure we have adequate cash and cash reserves. And then we go from there, as the commissioner had said, we come back to what's going to be acceptable, what's the environment that we can do this work in, and we set the rates and we adjust as necessary. So again, really important for folks to understand, we are purely revenue-based from our billing. We utilize the state revolving fund, which is an excellent source, and we work really well with the Mass DEP and the Treasury on low-interest loans for water, and we utilize that almost every year. It's a competitive process, so there's not a guarantee that you get it, and there is some debt forgiveness in the form of a grant, but that is always less than 5%. So there's no real substantial funding that we're getting. We have to pay back these loans, so it factors into our debt service. And then we issue our own bonds, and there's a cost to issuing bonds, and then that is additional debt service. And then the grants that are available are usually very limited in nature, from $25,000 to $250,000. And we pursue those aggressively, and we typically have anywhere between 2 and 5 of those in any given year. And those really end up being seed money for larger projects, but we do pursue those aggressively. So I want to transition into this year in particular. So we come around, we turn the corner in March into April, and we're looking at rate increases based upon our capital needs. And we were already struggling with a pretty high demand of capital due to some failures on projects that chose us. And then we turn the corner, and this is what we see. And if you're following this, this is our water demand. And so because of our statutory requirement to get the budget out and our rate increases, you can see here we are in mid-March, and we're plodding along pretty well. And then between March 18th and middle of April, the bottom drops out on water usage. We saw a 15 to 20% loss in water demand. I think it's important to understand we have two components to this. There's water demand, and then there's billing. And so we did not have billing data at this time because this is in real time as we're doing the budget, and it's in April. And what we see is just an overall drop in demand. And so we needed to respond to that drop in demand because we were putting forth a budget that was going to project out into fiscal year 21. And so we had no choice, because our process is to utilize trends to say this is what we're going to do. And so we're going to walk you through that. The good news in all of this is what I can tell you is here's the updated curve as of late last week. So you can see middle of April, we're bottoming out. And then the first week of May, we see an abrupt tick up in water demand. And we now know what this was and what it is about, but we're in a much, much better place than we were. We're right kind of where we need to be for water demand and usage now. And we're continuing to get more information. And those data points are really important to us. So let me keep advancing for you. The makeup of our revenue is 62% residential. So that's our biggest piece. And then industrial is 18%, but the majority of that industrial is a single user. And then wholesale and commercial make up another 10 and 8%. And then municipal billing is 2%. So I want to focus in on the process so you understand how we arrived at a 16.9% and why we got there and why the commission has asked us to kind of take another look that we have new data. So what you're going to see in orange is a 3-year average of consumption, okay? But in blue is what we had to predict. So blue goes back to your graph here where the bottom drops out. So middle of April, late April, we need to get a budget out there. So we need to predict what's going to happen. We were now in contact with some of our industrial users with an understanding that we had significant loss in water demand. And so we predicted out a 90% decrease because that's what we were experiencing in industrial and commercial. We predicted out a 90% decrease for the end of this fiscal year and a 75% going into the next year. That's all we had for the information. The bottom dropped out and we needed to put a budget out there. The good news is, here's what we found. So now that we have in the first week of April, we got, in the first week of May, we got April's data. I guess it's good because we only saw a 60% decrease in consumption from the industrial class rather than a 90. None of this is good, but 60% loss is better than 90%. And now in conversations with our largest users in the industrial class, we've projected out based upon a lot of the information and back and forth with them, what we foresee out into the end of this fiscal year and the beginning of the next fiscal year. And really we're projecting out by October, we're gonna have a full rebound. And so I think it's important to see in blue is what we had predicted at a 16.9% rate increase, with an understanding that we had no data other than the bottom dropping out. And then in black, seeing here for April is actual data, and now we've predicted out here in the coming months. I'm gonna walk through this in each of the major classes of customers here. I don't wanna take too much time. Counselor and Mr. President, do you want questions or can I just keep rolling through?
I think you should just keep rolling through and then we'll take the questions at the end.
Perfect. So again, commercial, we had the same predictive analysis of 90 rebounding to 75 and a full rebound in October. But what we saw was essentially a 40% reduction versus a 90%. So a major drop off, but not 90%. So this is good. And it's reflected now moving out for the next 6 months with a full rebound in October. When you look at residential, and this is a cause for a little bit of concern. We actually had predicted out an increase in residential use for the remainder of this fiscal year, and then even moving out into the next fiscal year. But the data came back and actually showed a 9% swing, that we were 4% below what we had predicted in April. Now, a lot of times in our business, this can be due to a cold and wet April when people aren't starting to water their lawns. So we're going to watch this closely. We carried it out in a little bit of the predictive analysis with a full rebound into the next fiscal year and then plodding along. So we're going to keep an eye on this. And then same thing in our wholesale, which is wholesale to communities. We had predicted pretty much even water usage. We saw a 7% reduction in the April data that we got in early May. We're going to keep an eye on this. We're really hoping that this is due to a cold and wet April. So again, we've now changed what our predictive analysis is moving out, our projections, and we're showing moving into July in the next fiscal year, we're going to be at that 3-year average. So this table is just all of that data in tabular form. And then the next really important thing for you folks to understand is our receivables. So this is our cash flow. And so, as Commissioner Otero had said, we early on in all of this, we understood what the impacts were going to be on our retail customers. And so in the middle of March, before most people had done anything, we already were waiving our shutoff program temporarily. We were already waiving late fees, and we were already looking at providing more relaxed payback plans for payment. So, but a lot of this has to do with cash flow and receivables. So we saw a 16% swing from March to April in our monthly receivables balance. And I'm not going to focus on that. I will focus on this, though. Our over 60-day receivables balance went up 32% over the 3-year average. Now, this is worrisome. We jumped from somewhere over 1.5 million, and now we're approaching 2 million, and we're going to see this continue to grow, is my guess. And I think we're built to take this to a point. And I think the board has clearly understood the stresses that are on our retail customers and have put in place a lot of plans to address that. But we need to keep a close eye on this, because this is a cash flow issue if this number continues to grow unchecked. And then just in terms of numbers, right, this is a 2 million number that we're approaching in dollars of over 60 days. In this, you're just seeing from March to April, essentially, we probably had 1,100 new customers go over 60 days. And so these are things we really need to watch and affect cash flow and affect our ability to continue to deliver what we're doing. So I want to talk just real briefly here, and then be glad to take any questions. And I can keep these up, counselors, to go back and forth. But I want to talk about the customer assistance programs that we have in place here, because Chairwoman Otero spoke to them, and I'd like to just for a minute. So again, we've talked about suspension of shutoffs and late fees and enhanced payment plans. And then last week, the board voted to increase the elderly, senior, and disabled discount from $33 to $75, which I think is also an important piece of this. And then to also understand that included within the budget that was 16.9%, we understood what this was going to cause for families and customers. And so we had already programmed in a customer assistance program that would be similar to a LIHEAP or a fuel assistance program that we will manage in-house at the Water and Sewer Commission. And that program is going to allow for a credit to approximately 4,000 families who are hardest hit from the economics and financially strained of COVID-19 and otherwise. And this is a program that is going to be in place moving forward year to year. And so with the understanding that each year our challenges are getting harder and harder, and that rates are continuing to go up to meet those needs, that we understand that the payment of water and sewer bills becomes a challenge. So we've planned to be able to help alleviate those stresses in the hardest hit customers of ours. And I know that's a lot of information quickly, but I do think it's just important for you guys to understand the process. The good thing is the trend. Water is being consumed now in a manner in which is making us feel a lot better. And as Chairwoman Otero said, we continue to look at this, and the May data that we're going to see in early June and late May is really going to put the finishing touches on what we're going to be able to do. So right now we basically have one data point. So getting that second data point for us is going to be really important in how we analyze each of the customer classes and what the final rate looks like. So I'm glad to answer any questions, and hopefully that was somewhat informative. Apologies for moving pretty quick there.
It absolutely was. Thank you, Mr. Schimmel. At this time, I will turn it over to Councilor Curran to either ask a question or comment on what has been heard.
First off, I just want to say thank you to Commissioner Otero and her presentation and her service on the board. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Schimmel for that presentation to the council. And I guess to Mr. Schimmel, I would just ask, if not 17% for raises this year, I mean, what exactly do you think, what's your estimation of what exactly you're going to propose at the meeting, if not 17, based on the data you have before yourself right now?
So, Counselor, thank you. I think it's really important for us to not throw a number out there until we get more data. I mean, the trend right now, as you can see, is we're trending up in water use, which means that the rate is going to be able to come down because we're not trying to account for significant losses. And so without seeing those numbers and working off of one data point, which is kind of what we did a month ago, and created a stir, and knowing that was going to happen, I don't think I can really speak to what it will be. I can speak to the fact that the trend is down, which I think is good for everybody. And I think we still have challenges, infrastructure challenges that need to be funded. And I think we have a lot of programs in place. So I think what the board has asked us to do is to get that data as soon as we can for May usage and roll it right into our public hearing. And, you know, typically, our typical process is May 1st, we issue our budget and rate increase to the city council and to the mayor. And then usually June 2nd or 3rd, we have our public hearing, and we usually have some stability. So we're not worried about massive changes. That's not the case this year. So unfortunately, we're kind of, our day of a budget hearing and our day of releasing the initial information aligned with the day we were running our billing. And so we were just getting that information upon the release of these information. So we're going to try to do some early meter reading to get a sense here in the next coming weeks to get a better indication. But I'm hesitant to put any number out there because we just haven't calculated it. We need more data, but the trend is good, Counselor.
I guess my other question is, what are you doing to pursue other sources of funding, perhaps from the state? I mean, obviously, the more that we raise rates, and obviously we have a major, you have to invest in infrastructure. I know many of your pipelines are over 100 years old. The more the rates go up, I'm guessing, the more the usage will go down, which would cause you to maybe go back and revisiting raising rates again. So, I mean, in terms of state funding, they just had a $2.5 billion bond bill, environmental bond bill, at the State House back about a year and a half ago, 2018, 2019, that Governor Baker put forth. I know out of that bond bill, the town of Palmer, which is a much smaller town than Springfield, got $2 million for water and sewer infrastructure. $2 million for Sturbridge. I think Northampton got $2 million. So what are we? I mean, what is our strategy in terms of the environmental bond bill, or what did we get out of that bill, and what are you doing to work with the Baker administration so that we can get that kind of funding that these smaller towns are getting to improve their infrastructure?
Sure. On that environmental bond bill, we had a $10 million program for combined sewer overflows that got yanked out on the day of the vote. So it was in the draft. You can look at it. We had pushed in through Pioneer Valley Planning Commission and the consortium of the Connecticut River Cleanup Committee, which consists of us, Chicopee, and Holyoke.
And what was that? What was the $10 million? What was that for? The 10 million?
Combined sewer overflows. So one of our biggest investments over the last 10 years, which is a regulatory-driven investment, by the way, unfunded federal mandate. And that got kicked out at the last minute. So it was in the final draft as far as we knew, and then it disappeared. So
we didn't get anything.
What's that?
So we didn't get anything out of that.
So we didn't, but I will say in the previous environmental bond bill, we did get us personally, the Springfield Water Sewer Commission, we received over $1 million in grants for the combined sewer overflow. So on the state level, we push. I'm in contact. I pretty much have been having a weekly call with Commissioner Suberg of DEP to stress some of the challenges that we're facing due to COVID-19 and the financial impacts. On the federal level, I had a call with the head of EPA during this COVID pandemic to discuss the financial impact. We've been working with the organizations that we're party to in the water sector to help scope out the language and shape the language, the stimulus bills. They keep kicking out the water and sewer piece of it. Originally, there was 3 parts to that. It was lost revenue that was going to be part of a stimulus package. There was a customer assistance program similar to what I just discussed. And then there's going to be economic stimulus in the form of grants for construction. the first two pieces of that have been consistently kicked out. We do believe that there's going to be, in one of the upcoming stimulus packages, infrastructure of which a portion will go to shovel-ready projects or soon-to-be shovel-ready projects.
Is there anything? There's currently a $18 billion transportation bond bill that made its way through the House. It hasn't been acted upon in the Senate. Is there anything in there for water and sewer in terms of infrastructure?
Great point, Counselor. No, when people talk infrastructure, and we really try to educate folks on this, they immediately jump to transportation, roadways, and bridges, and we are not included in any of that transportation. And so the organizations that we belong to have, and myself as well, have been to DC for Water Week. We lobby our delegation. We do everything we can to push and educate the need for the water sector. And I think one point that I think would be useful for the entire council is when our infrastructure was built here, the new infrastructure, right? Because our new infrastructure is 50 years old. Our old infrastructure is 98 years old. So our new stuff, which is now coming up on 55 years old, was built with 95% federal money and 5% local. Right? That is gone. We are essentially, as I've said, 100% funded through our rates. And so there's been this massive shift from the feds supporting the need for infrastructure on the water sector that has now gone away. They still support roads and bridges and transportation, but they do not support at all other than low interest loans. There are no grants essentially available on the federal or state level for the types of investment we need in the water sector. We're not alone in this. It's every water and sewer utility.
Councilor, if you could just wrap up, knowing that there are other councilors who have raised their hand in the queue. I know you were one of the ones, you and Councilor Gomez, who wanted to have this meeting, so I'm giving you a little bit more leniency in terms of the—
I'll yield the floor. Yeah, yeah.
Did you want to close out, Councilor Curran? Or? No,
I'll hold any other questions I have. So.
Okay, thank you, sir. Councilor Gomez, followed by Councilor Fenton, and then we'll move on to the individuals who have their hands raised in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members of the Water Sewer Commission, and Josh for meeting with us today. My first question is, initially, there was already an increase in place. That number was somewhere around, forgive me if I'm wrong, somewhere around 9% that you guys were already going to propose?
That's correct, in that range.
All right. And Councilor Curran had asked for a number that you said that you couldn't give, but essentially what preempted this meeting was the fact that the news or the Republican or Mass Live per se reported a 16.9%. I think that essentially that's what it was kind of like a fear that a number was given already. So for you to say, and I mean this respectfully, sir, for you to say that you don't want to put out a number, essentially what resulted this meeting was that if it wasn't reported that there was a proposed 16.9%, and we would have gotten this information on the back end instead of on the news, probably a lot of this this information and our reactions would have been a little bit more milder. Which I know that we have a really great working relationship, and we've met plenty of times, and I have tremendous respect for your commission. But essentially, I think just under what's going on with the pandemic, a lot of folks weren't really ready to hear that. You know, they weren't really ready to hear an increase. And one for sure, I know that Councilor Walsh and myself and former Councilor Bud Williams, we used to sit on a committee, and we had this conversation when Councilor Walsh had a big meeting down in Ward 1, and we talked about the crumbling infrastructure. And I know you guys are trying to tap into different resources, but essentially, you know, us having have you guys been talking to Chairman Neal's office about some of these issues that are going on? And I understand that it's going on all over the country. but essentially, him being the chairman of Ways and Means, have you guys lobbied or talked about, because you talked about 50 years ago, which might have been under Bolden's tenure in Congress, that brought in some of that infrastructure money. Is there any information that you would know on a federal level? Because essentially it just seems that now we know that we're going to be hurting for money on a municipal level and also on a state level. And I know you had talked about that there might be some kind of money coming through on the stimulus level. I think that, we should take heed and be careful on how, because I know that we're talking about our quality of water, and it could be taken some of our, what comes off is if we don't pay, then we're going to end up with a situation like Flint, Michigan, which I'm just using that as an example, as an extreme way of trying to understand the information that was given. And maybe I just think that, with you not being able to give us a rate increase number now, it just puts me in a place that I wish that we had this meeting a month ago before it was reported out on Mass Live.
So, Counselor, let me answer that in a couple of ways. So, as I said at the beginning, we have a statutory requirement to put the rate out there with the budget each year, and that just happened to align with the bottom dropping out in water usage. And so the process has been the same. I think we can communicate the way we build our budget like we just did here in the presentation. I think it's helpful to a lot of people. So I think we could probably communicate that better year to year, what goes into the process and why the numbers come out. So apologies if the communication wasn't clear, but we did release it and send it to the mayor and city council and did a press release. Every year we try to promote that, and every year nobody bothers to pick it up, and it's a struggle for us. But in terms of what we're doing, absolutely, we've been in contact with Congressman Neal. Congressman Neal was here probably 9 months ago to do the ribbon cutting on our York Street and River Crossing project, which is a $100 million project that we're getting state loans from, and we did get some debt service forgiveness. So we got a $5 million debt service relief on that. So we're participating in all of the water sector advocacy groups in DC. I'm on the board of some national organizations that are specifically set up to lobby for funding and to change the funding sources so there's federal money. Again, I had a one-on-one call with Administrator Wheeler from EPA last month to talk about the effects of the pandemic as well. And then, Councilor Letterman had sent some information about letters that he was writing, and certainly we're appreciative of that. And we are going to do the same as well. And really, things are moving so quickly during this period of not just this budgeting, but the COVID-19 and trying to keep services flowing, so to speak, and the concerns that we have. So yeah, we're fairly aggressive on every angle of money that we can get, any advantage we can get in competitive loans or competitive grants, we pursue it. And I think the important take, if you take away one thing from this, our budgeting process is from January to June. So although we released our budget April 1st, we have a board meeting in mid-April, May 1st. We have a board meeting in mid-May. We have a hearing in early June. And then in the middle of June, we will still have a vote. So we still have a month, Counselor, to work on the budget, to get more data points and to squeeze what we can out of it. And I think there's also, with the industrial usage coming back, we're going to be able to look at using different funding sources from reserves that we had a lot of concerns with going back to when we issued the budget on May 1st, when there were concerns about some of our industrial users, if they were going to reopen or not. And I think we have a better sense of where we are now, so that we may be able to use some of our reserves to help buy our way down in the rates.
So I just have one last hypothetical question, and then I'm done. And I just want to thank you for let's say that this rate increase that was reported was to actually happen. The way it was reported, it was because the usages were down specific to the pandemic is how I interpreted it. So essentially, if things were to open up and go back to normal, hypothetically, if the rate increase was to be adopted, would the rate increase, would the rate increase go back to the proposed 9%? If, I never really have seen that, but it's just a proposition that I'm trying to see if we had to go to the extreme and adopt 16.9% because of this, the usage issue. But then if usage went back to normal, regardless of, we know that we have infrastructure issues because that wasn't part of the report and what the public had read. Would the proposed increase from before go that you guys wanted in the kind of and it's an idea of 9%? Would there be a fluctuation of those rates going down in the future if that was adopted?
Mr. Schimmel, you answer that question. Can you stop sharing your screen so that counselors can see everyone those who are having trouble?
Let me, I'm sorry about that.
All right.
Let me try this. Did that do it? Stop share. How about that?
There you go.
Okay, sorry. Counselor, so from the previous slides, when we were showing the usage and the predictive analysis moving out, we really only carried those impacts to the first 3 months of the new fiscal year. So certainly we can adopt new rates mid-year through a public process, but we didn't carry COVID impacts other than the first quarter of fiscal year 21. We were shown a complete rebound in October, and maybe that was wishful thinking, or hopefully that is what the case is. But the fact that we're seeing usage back up to close to normal, I think it is the most important thing. So, what ends up happening is we were seeing probably almost a $9 million revenue loss between that original projection of 16.9 was a revenue loss in the current fiscal year and into the first quarter of the next fiscal year. And so we were reshuffling the entire deck on how to accommodate the loss of revenue in this year and not let it spill over into next year, and then deal with the revenue loss in next year. And obviously there was no way out of that other than to show that we were going to raise the rates. And so with the understanding that we would get more information and we'd be able to adjust. So that piece, I think we failed to communicate very well. However, that is what the intent always was, is we had a statutory requirement to put the budget out and that we were going to work our tails off to bring it back once we had more data points, which we do now. So we'll have to see where it goes. But we do have a baseline infrastructure need that needs to be funded, and that originally was somewhere between 9 and 12%, and then the COVID impacts drove it up further from that.
President Hurst, could I make a comment to lift something up that the counselor questioned?
You may.
Thank you. So this idea that the 16.9 announcement could have been sort of held back or maybe not announced at all. While it seems alarmist, right, it feels like, and what you stated, Councilor Gomez, was if in fact we don't pay the 16.9, then we risk something like the things that are happening in other parts of this country. And I just want to highlight for all of you that they don't call this critical infrastructure for nothing. Like this is not the commission being alarmist. This is a reality. And and we're not just susceptible to pandemics, we are susceptible to climate change, and we're susceptible to cybersecurity. And so the environment in which the commission is operating lends itself for these kinds of conversations. So at the very least, I'm grateful that we're talking and that you get to see firsthand exactly what it is that the commission is dealing with day in and day out.
Thank you, Commissioner Otero. Thank you, Councilor Gomez. I think at this point in time, it might make sense to segue to a spreadsheet that Councilor Fenton and I had a conversation about prior to this meeting. And Councilor Fenton, if this works, I will turn the floor, or I will give the floor to you. And then I know councilors have their hands raised. We will have a hard stop at 1 o'clock. And so I think we have ample time to get to all of the councilors. So with that being said, Councilor Fenton, are you all able to see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay, Councilor Fenton, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. If you could just zoom out a little bit on the spreadsheet so that you can see the whole thing.
I knew you were gonna make me work. Zoom out a little bit on the spreadsheet.
The bottom right-hand corner.
Yeah, bottom right-hand corner.
Lower right-hand corner there, Mr. President.
Oh, I see. I got you. I knew that. Glad this isn't live. Is that zooming? Am I zooming out?
Yep, just a little. There you go. That's perfect. Okay, so first to Commissioner Otero and Mr. Schimmel, thank you very much for your work and your very thorough presentation. As all of us know, but the public may not always be aware, the Water and Sewer Commission is a separate entity from the city of Springfield, and the city council's role in this process is really limited to oversight over the appointment procedures of the members of the commission. We don't have any authority over your budget or the rates. Commissioners are appointed on a 3-year term, and it's done on a volunteer basis. So first, I want to thank expressly Commissioner Otero for chairing this board on a volunteer basis and for coming and helping with these questions that members of the council have to help our constituents in terms of transparency. Because of that, our dialogue has to happen, in my opinion, at a little bit of a higher level than commission staff might otherwise get into, like Mr. Schimmel. Our oversight is limited to the commissioner's appointment, and therefore I'm going to take a pretty high level look at this budget. I prepared this morning this spreadsheet that President Hurst is sharing, and the last thing I want to say before I delve into it is just that I was really happy to hear that the commission is also, while looking at a very significant rate and bill increase, taking a very active approach to increasing discounts for seniors, more than doubling the senior discount from $35 to $75, and increasing the economic assistance program that you have to expand it to up to 4,000 households. Not sure how much that stuff is going to cost you, but I'm glad to hear that those things are happening, as well as allowing for some leniency in terms of bill periods during the COVID-19 crisis. So the spreadsheet, just to walk everybody through what I put together from data available from the commission's website and through the city's historical budget data. There's 2 different data sets. The first data set at the top are Springfield Water and Sewer Commission rate and bill information from FY21, which is proposed, back to FY16, so the last 6 fiscal years. And then for the city, we don't have 2021 data yet because we haven't set our rates. So I went back 1 year earlier to 2015. So you can see that there's a few things going on here. The first is that the water and sewer rates are very different from each other, and they have different categories for rates. For water, there's 2 different rates, residential and commercial, and the proposed increase on that rate is close to 17%. Then there's a separate rate for industrial and municipal. The sewer rate is broken down very differently. Residential and municipal, which is going to see a proposed 17% increase, and then 3 different rates, commercial and hospital, industrial, and restaurant. Those are all seeing significant proposed increases as well. The final column on the right under water and sewer shows, as reported by the Water and Sewer Commission, the typical annual household bill and the way that that's increased over time. So you can see that the difference between 16 and 17 was about 4%, 17 and 18, about 4%. And then for the next 3 fiscal years after that, the increase on average in the bill for your average household bill was about 7%, then 10%, and 12%. These are really significant numbers, really significant, and make it hard to justify a rate increase of this kind over such a prolonged period of time, and based on the testimony we're hearing, looking forward into the future, apparently. If you take the percentage increase from FY16 versus FY21, in terms of the rates, the yellow highlighted line on the bottom back under water, that's about a 52% increase in the water rate in 6 years. 46% increase in the sewer rate in that same period of time. And the bills are going up by about 43% during that period of time. I would specifically point to the fact that the commission is expecting an annual household bill for FY 2021 of $1,312, which is a 12% increase over last year. That means that it's not just a matter of usage going down, it's also a matter of bills going up significantly. I'm sure that there are some really great explanations for why that has to be the case, given the infrastructure needs and our desire to stay up with this critical infrastructure for the city. But when you look at it at a macro level over what's been happening over the last 6 years, I really have significant concerns about where we've been and where we're headed. To create an analysis so that we can compare it to what we on the city council have been doing with Springfield property tax owners, to be fair, those increases, we have been increasing property tax bills as well. It's not like we've just been freezing them over the last 6 years. The second set of data in the lower black highlighted box entitled City of Springfield Property Tax Data and Property Tax Rate and Bill Overview shows that the rate for residences has remained incredibly stable over the last 6 years. That isn't to say the bills have been stable. Bills have gone up consistently, and you can see that in the average change for a single family home, fluctuating on average between $100 and $140, it looks like. And then the percentage change column on the far right shows you what we've been tracking every year. FY15 to 16 was a good year for Springfield property taxpayers, a reduction in their average bills. And then every year after that, 5.3, 3.8, 2.7, 5.4% up. Those are much more consistent with the cost of living adjustment, a little bit above. And if you look at how we've gone up from FY15 to FY20, the net increase in that 6-year period is 18.12%. When you compare this to what's happening with the Water and Sewer Department, Water and Sewer Commission, which has a fraction of the number of responsibilities and employees of the city of Springfield, the differences are alarming, and I feel very illustrative. So I'm not saying that this chart is should be the only decision point. I'm not using it as a tool to embarrass anybody or to say that the Water and Sewer Commission hasn't had justifiable increases over time. But I do think that it's important that the public see and evaluate this data, because it's pretty alarming to me. With all that said, I do not pretend to be an expert on the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission budget. And so all that I would like to do in this hearing and make a request of Commissioner Otero and the other commissioners who we appoint is that they explore any and all options to avoid a 17% increase this year and a 12% increase in the average bills. You know, they are much more expert in terms of how that can be done. But I think one thing you can see from this chart is that the industrial and municipal water rate is significantly lower than the residential and commercial water rate. Other water rates that do not impact Springfield City residents should be explored as opportunities to increase revenue to allow the commission to continue to meet its infrastructure needs. That might mean adjusting other categories of rates that don't impact Springfield residences. It might also mean increasing the wholesale water prices that we sell to our suburban neighbors. or some of the retail customers that we have in Ludlow and other areas. I expect that this discussion will be thorough from the commission, and I'm very happy to hear that they met on Friday to discuss what can be done to alleviate this burden on taxpayers. But I think that from our standpoint and my standpoint as a member of the city council, I'm going to have much more questions for members of the commission when the next appointment comes up. I believe Mr. Rodriguez's appointment is up in September. And those questions are going to focus around, what did you do to change this trajectory?
Thank you, Councilor Fenton. Mr. Schimmel, I don't know if you wanted to speak briefly to any of the points that Councilor Fenton raised, or Commissioner Otero.
Sure. Let me, I appreciate the commentary, Councilor, and the perspective. All due respect, it's apples and oranges, because when you look at municipal financing and budgeting, which I have no expertise in, but what I do know is that there's state and federal aid that comes to municipalities, and there's a cap on the increase in taxes, on property taxes. So I don't want to particularly speak about that, but there is a flow of state and federal funding that comes to municipalities. We don't have that. It's just a totally different animal. And so I guess the middle ground in all of this is we probably need to communicate better to and we do try, and we put a full court press on, but we need state and federal aid in order to overcome infrastructure needs that are outstripping our ability and affordability as the community as a whole. And again, I know this is our local problem. It's essentially everywhere. Either you're investing in your infrastructure to replace it in an appropriate, responsible manner, and that costs a lot of money, or you're not investing in it and you're just going to wait for it to break and then deal with the emergencies. It's really, there's this pathway that we've taken to really try to balance each year appropriate, responsible, and thoughtful investment, and that's what we do. And as Chairwoman Otero spoke to it, it is a challenge for us every year because we're sensitive to the rate increases. But you have infrastructure here that is critically important. And I think at no time in our history has it been a light shown on this, how important having clean water is to the economy, to public health, to fire protection. And so that is the challenge we face with no state or federal help whatsoever. And I think that understanding the economics of the difference between municipal and utility funding is really challenging for us. It's challenging to educate all of our customers on that. And then additionally, as far as different types of customers we have in wholesale and retail and industrial, I mean, we do cost of service analysis, we do rate studies, we do customer class analyses to make sure, and we're in the middle of one right now, to make sure that we're charging the appropriate amounts based on all of the recommendations of all of the water sector leaders across the country. And so we're doing everything we can to make sure that the right folks are being charged the right amount, and we're not saying, "Oh, cut these ones a break and let the retail customers pick it up." It's not that way. And we can characterize each one of our customer classes and justify the rates for them based upon a number of different standards that exist. So Counselor, it's extremely challenging, and we understand that this comparison makes sense to you and to others, and it makes sense to me. I'd be asking the same questions. However, the need for us to be able to deliver on our mission of giving folks clean water to your tap. I mean, I say this all the time. I say it every year. You turn your tap on and you get clean water, you flush your toilet and it goes away. It's a miracle. I'm telling you, it's a miracle. That water travels 50 miles from Cobble Mountain and gets treated clean into your tap, and then you get to flush it away. It's a remarkable system that is in need of investment.
Thank you, Mr. Schimmel. And Councilor Fenton, I know you look like you have a rebuttal, but I want to make sure that we get to all of the before our time is up. So if there is time at the end, I certainly will allow for that. Councilor Letterman, followed by Councilor Ramos. And I assure you, councilors, we will not finish this meeting until everyone in the queue has had an opportunity to ask a question at least.
President Hurst, could I, I think Councilor Fenton said something directly to the commissioners, and I'd like to address it.
I'm gonna hold off, Ms. Otero. I'm gonna circle back around to you. Councilor Letterman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, could you stop sharing your screen?
Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Josh and Commissioner Otero, for being here. I'm cognizant of the infrastructure challenges that the Water and Sewer Commission faces. When I was chairman of the Committee on Health and Human Services, we held a series of meetings with staff from the Water and Sewer Commission in response to the tiered water quality violations that the commission was receiving as a result of the increase in haloacetic acids. And I know that counselors that were able to attend those meetings kind of got a preview, I think, of recognizing the infrastructure challenges that exist and the need for a proactive approach to making sure that we, upgrade critical infrastructure and keep Springfield as a place that's known for our quality water. I think it's something that's been talked about in Springfield for a long time, that we're lucky to have access to that type of need in our community, and we want to keep it that way. But I think the question that I really have today is more a matter of the raw numbers. I think there's been a lot of important issues raised, but what is the actual revenue shortfall that's being projected that's getting in the way of achieving the budgeted goals of the Water and Sewer Commission? How much money do you feel you're going to be short as a result of COVID-19?
So, Counselor, I can speak to what was released in the 16.9% budget. I think we were seeing a $4 million shortfall in the current fiscal year for April, May, and June, and then a $5 million shortfall for the first 3 months of the next fiscal year. Tony, can you just confirm that we were about $9.1 million of revenue shortfall between the 2 years, and we had to be creative in how we balanced out the shortfall in this year and took care of next year as well. Is that number right, Tony? 9.1?
Yeah, that's accurate, Josh. And also we had an impact, which was a little bit of uncertainty as to collection beyond the first 3 months of next fiscal year. So really what you're talking about is the 3 months ending this fiscal year and the 3 months to start last fiscal year. So that's a 6-month period, and there would be an impact probably going forward beyond the September date of FY21.
And that impact—
That was at a minimum.
That impact, Counselor, just to be clear, was what we discussed about delinquency and over 60 days. And as that number climbs up, it's a concern, and that's not factored into that 9.1 million.
So your indication is that the rate increase was necessary because of delinquent bills or because of a reduction in water use?
Reduction in water use compounded by lack of cash flow from inability to collect. So
you now indicate that it looks like the water use is on an upward trend?
Yes.
Okay. And so I know Councilor Curran asked, when you're going to be able to release that rate. I think that's going to be what's interesting to see. But I think the bigger question here is why, to the issue that you raised, our federal and state government has seemingly abandoned the critical infrastructure from water utilities. And that's not just an issue in Springfield, but I did send a letter to our entire state and federal delegation. I've only heard back from Representative Gonzalez, who indicated that he would be raising the issue in Boston. But I seriously believe that there has to be assistance from the state and federal government, not only to the point of lost revenue as a result of COVID-19, which should be a given, that we wouldn't pass the entirety of that cost on to the ratepayers, but also in far more general terms to water infrastructure. People keep citing these things that have happened in other communities, but the truth is that it seems to me that we are completely self-funding the water infrastructure of the greater Springfield region, and I can't imagine why we're not seeing those funds come back to the city of Springfield, why we were thrown out of the environmental bond bill that was discussed earlier. And so we need to have a serious conversation with our elected representatives relative to that. In the meantime, it seems to be on us to figure out how to make sure that the residents of Springfield aren't caught holding the bag. And so I'm hopeful that as a result of this hearing, it sounds like there may be some reconsiderations, but I think that's the key short term, but we also have to think long term.
There's a larger problem, as you've stated, in the need for federal and state grant money to assist water and wastewater utilities in kind of renewing their infrastructure. If we have to do it on our own, you're looking at what the future is. It's rate increases that we will do our best to control every year, but that's what we're faced with. A need that is not going away anytime shortly. I mean, right now we already have planned out a 40-year capital program, right? So now we don't have a crystal ball into that, but that's how far we're looking to make sure that we're making smart investment now, so that we're not wasting a dollar right now. We're squeezing everything we can to understand that what we invest in today, we're not going to have to reinvest in. And we're doing that in the midst of changing regulations, climate change, cybersecurity threats. The list is endless of the challenges. And by the way, the water and wastewater sector are some of the highest and most regulated industries in business, period. I mean, we're under tremendous regulatory pressure, and those regulations change year to year, and they don't get any looser. They get more and more restrictive, and there's a price tag associated with that. So obviously, we support anything we can get from state and federal monies.
Thank you, Councilor Letterman, Councilor Ramos, followed by Councilor Davila, and then Councilor Williams. I just want to be mindful. We have 18 minutes until 1 o'clock. So I know there are some other councilors who haven't spoken. I will defer to those councilors first, and then we will wrap up at 1 o'clock. So Councilor Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I'll try to be as brief as possible to give others an opportunity to speak. First of all, thank you to the commission. Thank you for everyone for joining us on this meeting. Look, I understand and I sympathize with the challenges that you are facing as a utility provider, but it's important to remember that no one right now is operating under business as usual. And it seems to me that this budget process is being created under business as usual. It would not be responsible for any business to continue to draft their next fiscal year budget in the same way that they've done in the past. The current climate calls for adjustments, modifications, compromises, changes, anything. Because this is not business as usual, and these are unprecedented times. The city of Springfield, we prepare our budget based on projected revenue as well. We compare last year's numbers, previous year's numbers, we take the projected revenue, and then we create our budget. This year, however, the budget process is going to be modified because of the current climate and to reflect the current climate. I appreciate the graphs. I appreciate the explanation. I appreciate the short-term actions that you've taken in terms of suspending shutoffs and suspending late fees. But the bottom line is that the people who are going to be affected by this, your residential customers, many of them are unemployed. Your commercial customers, many of them have been forced to close. They have no revenue at all. I represent Eastman, the largest water user, water purchaser in the city of Springfield, who employs hundreds of people, most of them Springfield residents. I represent in my district the Eastfield Mall, which is one of the largest commercial taxpayers in the city that have already they're already facing challenges in competing with online businesses. And this increase would be devastating to those businesses, and it would be devastating to the local workforce. So look, the city of Springfield has implemented, in response to COVID-19, the city of Springfield has implemented a spending freeze, and we've implemented a hiring freeze. And so I support what my colleague, Councilor Fenton, Councilor Curran, and Councilor Letterman mentioned about exploring other options, I think that should be Plan A, is for the Springfield Water and Sewer Commission to explore other options such as federal and/or state funding, loans, grants, etc. And in the meantime, I think the responsible thing to do would be to have a rate freeze until all other options are exhausted. So that's my recommendation.
Since that sounds like a recommendation and is in the form of a statement and not a question, we will move on to Councilor Davila, followed by Councilor Williams, and then Councilor Whitfield. Thank you, Councilor Ramos.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thanks to Ms. Otero, Mr. Schimelt, and Mr. Basile for your presentation. I do have to say that I find this whole subject fascinating. I will try to be brief and be mindful of time, but I have a specific question maybe either one of you could answer. This rate, are they Springfield specifics, or is this reflective to the entire region?
The rate structure, the 16.9% is across the retail customers, which is Springfield and Ludlow. The increase to the wholesale is actually larger than that. I don't have that in front of me. It's a different scenario because we have contracts with wholesale, not wholesale, with our wholesale customers. They're contractually driven on the water and wastewater side. There's a separate series of contracts. So the rate of 16.9% is the retail rate increase.
So when you say retail, am I to understand that also includes residential?
Yes. Yep.
So that so am I correct to understand then that that applies to the other towns and cities that we service as well?
No, because those are wholesale customers and they buy the water wholesale, and then they're responsible for collection and distribution, home services, and all of that, right? The rates that reflect for Springfield residents and Ludlow residents, what I call retail rates, includes the upkeep of the distribution system through the water in the city streets, as well as the wastewater collection system and all of that infrastructure. The wholesale customers of Longmeadow, East Longmeadow, West Springfield, Agawam, Wilbraham, they're responsible either for the water from when it comes over their border and meter, then they own it from there, and the distribution and maintenance and regulatory requirements, and the same thing on the wastewater side. They're responsible for their own town system. So it's a different rate structure altogether.
Right, so I'm trying to be mindful of time before the president points it out, but just to be clear, so have we explored the contract rate for them in the future? Have we explored any other way that we could increase revenue by the contract that we service, or by the contract with other towns and cities?
Yeah, we do. I mean, that's part of every year. That's part of what we do. It's also part of what typically happens every 5 years in terms of a cost of service analysis to make sure that the appropriate charges are going to the appropriate sources as it relates to wholesale and retail, et cetera. So we do look at it time to time. We're in the middle of it right now. And so we look at that each and every year, and then in a great deal of detail, probably every 3 to 5 years, to make sure we're using the right methodology to bill folks. Always a concern. It's a good question, and we do aggressively look at that each year.
My final question is, before my final question, if I could, Mr. Schimel, if you could be kind enough to send that presentation to us. I found it very helpful. I would be very appreciative if you could send it to us. My final question is, if do we, speaking to what Councilor Fenton was kind of pointing out before, why is the difference, or what would be the impediment of looking at different, at adjusting the rates for the industrial and commercial in Springfield?
So there's some typical standards that are utilized to determine how the difference between the classes of customer, and we spend a lot of time working internally and with the external experts in in billing and customer classification and how they get billed. We continue to look at that. There's, again, like everything we do, there's a balance. You don't want to drive out certain customer classes that are important to the economy, the local economy, important to water use. And so what we've adopted is very typical of what is in the industry, in the water business, and those rate structures reflect that.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Davila, Councilor Williams, Whitfield, and Walsh. We will conclude after Councilor Walsh. Councilor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I just want to say thank you, Josh and Vanessa, for giving that presentation and actually providing me with a lot of insight into your operations. I just wanted to kind of drill down and reinforce one issue, and that is the issue of communications around the proposed increase. I had a lot of, seniors from Pine Point, 16 acres region of the city, contact me after seeing that Mass Live report or hearing about it. And I know I kind of wish the services that were available to seniors could be pronounced more as loudly as that proposed increase was. I think that would do a lot of good. And I just want to circle back on that point. And just the question I had is, I know you mentioned, Josh, that 30% of Pioneer Valley is serviced by the Water and Sewer Commission, correct?
30% of the entire population of Western Massachusetts.
Western Mass. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So the question, I saw something actually just rolling down Facebook today about the flushing of fire hydrants and how that has increased over time to wash out the HAA5 haloacidic acids. So my question is, who bears the brunt of taking, in terms of that consumption, who bears the brunt for residential and industrial or retail, however you framed it, in regards to that continuous running of water?
So that's part of our operational cost and gets divvied up as part of our operating cost. And so it's a water quality issue. You may look at that and say it's wasteful, but that right now, based upon the treatment systems and our ability to treat the water, lowering water age in our system is critically important to us. And so it may be perceived as being wasteful, but that is a strategic flushing of our system that helps keep our water in regulatory compliance. So those costs are part of the operating cost overall and are passed on across the board. So nobody's essentially built for that. It's just part of the operating cost.
Thank you. And just one last point, Mr. President, if I can, I had to wait. Just in regards to, I know other councilors commented on diversifying funding streams and revenue. I mean, you're speaking to a grant writer, so I know it can be tough to get money through the door, especially through state and local, or federal, aid. But I think, I know you had mentioned aggressive being a word that you used, and it's hard to believe that no state or federal aid exists. So I'm just interested to know, if I can, what mechanisms or databases you're using to access these federal grants and these applications or requests for proposals.
Yeah, I mean, we get grants from Mass DEP, from Fish and Wildlife, from EPA. We've gotten some grants from state and federal tribal land grants. So we utilize Pioneer Valley Planning Commission. Obviously, they are really good at getting grants. So we partner with them on a lot of grants. And then we utilize grants that come specifically to the water sector. We're on a listserv for those grants, and we pursue those. So between Pioneer Valley, we've partnered with for millions of dollars in grants. And then we've managed to get a bunch of grants through the water sector. And then there's some debt forgiveness from the state in the SRF program that does amount to a lot. However, when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, like $1 and $2 million isn't going to solve the problem of grants.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Williams, Councilor Whitfield. Thank you so much for being so patient. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Josh, for your presentations. I think they were great. I just have a couple comments, and then I have a question. I know that you said that you increased the discount for the seniors to $75, and thank disabled veterans as well. And I think that's great. But when the bills went up about $400 over from FY16 to now, a $75 reduction is great, but it doesn't really like affect their pockets because their increase is about 1.6% cost of living increase every year. And so they're still going to really be struggling with, you know, this water bill. And I was trying to look at your budget to see all of the revenue expenses. While you have the operating spelled out good and in several different places, the revenue budget isn't clear to me. So I was wondering, is it just the collection fees from the bills and late fees and the small grants that you talked about? Is that all the revenue you receive?
That's it. There is no other outside influx of revenue. It's fees, billing, and a small bit of grants. Tony, you can confirm that for me, correct?
Yeah, Josh, the numbers that you put up represents about 95% of our revenue budget. There are related revenue streams such as interest income and miscellaneous revenues such as sale of scraps and that sort of thing. But pretty much what you presented represents what we operate off of, 95% of our revenue sources.
95%. And then I also looked at your operating budget and I looked at the personnel costs, and that's about 25 million. Is that correct?
The personnel costs, strict salaries is 15 million. And then the difference probably what you're looking at is fringe benefits.
Yeah, I'm doing fringe benefits and personnel costs. And how many staff do you have approximately?
225 employees.
225 employees. But I did see that there was a reduction in the staff of about 500,000 over last year in your budget. So I think that you were looking at staff costs and cuts as well. So I want to commend you on that. But I also want to just ask that if there's any way that you can look at the industrial municipal revenue that we're bringing in and what we are charging other cities and towns, because putting all the costs off to the Springfield residents, it just seems like a lot. And there's a lot going on right now. It seems a little bit unfair. And our job is to look after Springfield residents. So I know that there's some new numbers coming out soon. I hope that they are very favorable. I think you guys are doing a good job. I think you are trying. I was glad to see that the personnel costs went down, because if that would have increased, you know, that would have been a little bit more questionable. So I know that you are looking to try to save money where you can. And just thank you for the hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Whitfield. Councilor Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I also, like the rest of my colleagues, want to thank the presentation from the Water and Sewer, from Josh and Vanessa. And I think my colleagues today, Mr. President, have raised some excellent points. Appreciated the charts. And I think it'd be good to end on this note, that I hope the members of the Water and Sewer Commission and the ones that are not here, that after hearing the concerns raised by my fellow councilors today, that this discussion will lead to a reduction and not an increase in rates. And when you do have your board meetings, are they open to the public, and when are they, and how much does input from the public count at your board meetings?
So,
and that's a question.
Counselor, appreciate that. So I think typically at our public hearing, which is June 2nd, virtual meeting, we will have an opportunity to express verbal questions, and you can submit in writing questions, and then they can be addressed up until the board vote, which I think is the 17th or 18th of June. So there's plenty of time now to submit questions, to submit questions during the meeting itself in real time, and then we will respond to those. And then we'll allow that opportunity before the vote on the 17th, I think it is, to address questions as well before the board takes a vote.
Well, no, what I was thinking is more your board meetings. Is that where the actual rate is set, and is the public included in that meeting?
The board meetings are public meetings. They get posted. Every month pursuant to our stat. I mean, I don't do the posting, so I don't know. But public meeting. They're posted through the public meeting laws, etc. And we're in compliance with all of that. As much as we've tried over years to get people to pay more attention to the plight of water and the challenges that we face. Apparently, it takes a 16.9% rate increase to have people.
Unusual times.
And not in a good way, but I do recall, a couple of years back when we did the infrastructure meeting down on Main Street because of the sinkholes, and we talked about the exact same things, right?
Unfunded mandates have been around a long time.
Yes, they have.
Okay, but I think we're all happy to say how good Springfield Water is. Good note to end on.
Thank you, Councilor Walsh. I concur with you. I think this was a very robust meeting with some excellent questions and a lot of great information. Ms. Otero, I did not allow you to speak when Councilor Fenton did address you in a question, and so I do want to circle back, and we will end after you have an opportunity to respond.
Thank you, President Hurst. I guess I want to say that in terms of this idea that commissioners will be asked questions about the difference between this rate and whatever we end up with and how we got there, I welcome that. I think those are questions that should have been asked all along. And again, as I stated before, having this conversation finally puts this utility that is usually taken for granted in the middle of this kind of a conversation. I've been sitting on the commission for years now, and we have public meetings and we have our yearly budget announcement, and no one shows up. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I think that those robust questions should be something that a strategy that's employed with all commissioners, not just the commissioners of the Water and Sewer Commission, because we do this on a volunteer basis. And I would love to go to sleep at night, with the ignorant bliss of not worrying about a water failure. I choose to volunteer and be part of this team. And so I hope that while we are considering 16.9% to be a huge increase, I'm not embarrassed about that because I know what the need is. And so I appreciate your time, and I hope that in time, others will also appreciate the need that the commission faces day in and day out.
Thank you.
Mr. President, a quick point of information before we conclude.
Thank you for your professionalism and your volunteerism, Vanessa. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Mr. President, point of information, 30 seconds before we conclude.
Yes, Mr. Davila. Yes, our Councilor Davila. Sorry, yes.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. I too want to thank Ms. Otero and the entire staff for a good, robust conversation. With that in mind, I think, and I would like to suggest, Mr. President, that we have roughly about a month before the budget for the water and sewer was passed. I will propose that we revisit this conversation in about 2 weeks, two and a half weeks, to see where we are before the actual budget. I think it would be beneficial, and to continue that robust conversation which Ms. Otero has alluded. Furthermore, I do believe that we should, from time to time, the wish of the President, we should have a similar meeting with the Water and Sewer Commission to pinpoint any potential issues so we don't end up in this situation in the future. Thank you.
I thank you, Councilor Davila. With that being said, it is now 1:03. I too, as the President of the Council, want to thank the Water and Sewer Commission for coming before the Council. You are absolutely correct. We need to do this more often. I think these are difficult times. Otherwise, I know I could have relied on Councilor Williams, who is chair of the Maintenance and Development Committee, to hold a similar meeting. And if we were doing subcommittee meetings, I'm sure he would have held a number of meetings. So with that said, thank you so much for your time. I apologize it went over our traditional hour, but I think it was well worth it. You guys have an excellent afternoon. I need to tend to my little ones.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day, everybody.